Nau mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou kanoa te mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I've got a whole list of acknowledgements here, but I've only got 10 minutes to speak. So consider yourself acknowledged. Everyone in this room is important and you're here because you can contribute. So I welcome you all and it's good to be here. Hey, what I'm going to do is divide this up into about 3 sections. First of all, I'm just going to give a very, very brief overview of the global situation in which we had to consider when the government was putting together a budget. First of all, we all know about distressed global supply chains. Ports in China, ports in the United States, incredibly busy. China locked down as the government believes it can stop Omicron. And when you lock down the ports of one of the largest manufacturing nations in the world, you end up with huge problems. This has, of course, led to inflation as economies abruptly opened in a way that caught the global manufacturing sector offside. Massive stimulation from President Biden didn't help, but that was a policy that the Americans decided to implement. Wage growth caused by labour shortage, which in one respect isn't bad if it's happening at the bottom end of the wage sector, but certainly wage growth. And then we've got a war in Europe. That obviously doesn't help things either. Let me also talk about what is happening with regard to global food. We all know that Russia and Ukraine are the world's first and fifth biggest exporters of wheat for a combined total of 28% of the world market. China has warned that last year's floods mean that winter wheat crop will be the worst in history. Much of America's grain belt is undergoing a drought as bad as the one which it saw in 2012, 2013, and around 40%, of the wheat growing in America's parched plains was recently deemed in poor or very poor quality. Europe is getting too little rain at a point in the season when wheat is most vulnerable to dryness, and India has implemented a ban on food exports as record heat waves create havoc. In fact, there are currently 26 countries implementing severe restrictions on food exports. In most cases, they are outright bans, and by some estimates, 80% of the global population live in countries which are net importers of food. A little bit of good news. Oh, sorry to start like that, but we live in New Zealand, the lucky country, one of the luckiest countries. The OECD, good news is that households across the OECD are still sitting on roughly $4 trillion worth of saving, or about 8% of GDP, accumulated during the pandemic. And contrary to what is commonly supposed, not all of that money is in the hands of the wealthy. Apparently in America, the bank accounts of low-income families were still 65% fatter than at the end of 2019. Businesses too look resilient for now. Rising costs are hitting profits of some retailers, but the OECD's measure of business confidence remains solid and there remains appetite for investment. And analysts at JP Morgan Chase, for example, reckon that global capital spending rose by 7.6% in the first 3 months of the year compared to the same period of the year before. So it is in this environment of huge global uncertainty that the government put together a budget with a theme around security for all Kiwis in good times and bad. Now, what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about what we're doing in my business portfolios, but as mentioned, can leave time for questions. So let's start with industry transformation plans. These are 8 areas of our economy where we believe we have got some form of global competitive advantage or should have some form of global competitive advantage, but we haven't at the moment. These are not Wellington dictating to segments of the economy what should happen. These are done in partnership with the owners, the workers, the sector, and Maori. And they are proving to be very powerful at engaging people in ideas and actions around what should happen. And there's been a number of actions that have come out of these. We invested $148 million more in this budget into these. It's on top of the over $40 million last time. They are about medium to long term. However, the way that they are put together is there will be actions that will be able to be put in place in the next 1 to 3 years. You know, we have one of the lowest levels of multi-factor productivity in the OECD. What's happened in the past is we have overvalued labour and undervalued capital. So as a consequence, what businesses have done is they've just employed more people as opposed to spending capital on bits of machinery or plant that's going to drive productivity. It has really, well in the past, it's had really good labour market outcomes, but when we head into any form of recession, it shows up how inefficient and unproductive our economy is. We really need to change that. Second thing I'll talk about is a business growth fund. This is $100 million that we've appropriated to set up a fund in conjunction with the banks. This has worked in the UK and Ireland and Canada and most recently in Australia. There's still a little bit of work to do on this, not least of which the Reserve Bank has to change a couple of their prudential rules, but they're out consulting on this. But we've had a number of conversations with the major banks, and we are very confident that we can crowd in a fund that will be available to small to medium businesses around the revenue between $3 and $30 million. This was identified as a gap in the market by the Small Business Council that I put together in the first term, and we think it's important. It's not a VC fund, patient capital, and the thing about it is it will provide a level of competency and guidance and support to small to medium businesses that want to take things to the next level. It is equity funding, it's not debt funding. But as mentioned, it's worked well in other jurisdictions. It was identified as a gap in the market, and we're very confident we can get this going. Let me talk a little bit about Digital Boost. Those of you who are involved in the SME sector will know that, certainly over lockdown, that any business that had some form of digital enablement did better than those that didn't. McKinsey, I think they said something along the lines that in the US, they saw 5 years worth of digital adoption compressed into 8 weeks, and very, very similar to what we've seen in New Zealand. In fact, if you have a look at your stock standard bell curve for digital adoption, that was completely thrown out the window when COVID hit. And I used to say this pre-COVID, but it's more relevant today, that this is the last generation, I believe, of business owners that will survive, let alone thrive, without being digitally enabled. And the reason I say that is because everything the government is doing is based around digital platforms, whether it's e-invoicing, whether it's procurement, whether it's paying your taxes. And one thing we do know, as a former Minister of Revenue, whenever we had one of our business transformation releases, the Inland Revenue, despite what you may think, is actually usually pretty popular with its customers. But it dived. Satisfaction with IR dived. Then 6 weeks later, it peaked again as people said, goodness me, I should have been doing this for years. So change is a little bit difficult, but everything we are doing is based on some form of digital platform. So digital transformation is huge, hence the reason why Digital Boost, we're pushing out in a big way. So far, about 30,000 businesses have taken it up. It's a free system. Get on board. You don't get many things free from the government, but this is adding significant value and it's doing really, really well. Let me also briefly talk about tourism. We put together a $54.2 million innovation program for tourism recovery. And this is about understanding our global competitive advantage or our unique selling point. And we haven't quite figured out the parameters of where this should fit, but we've had a couple of conversations. Is it the guy with the PET kayak that wants to make it out of hemp? Or is it the really big things that are going to make a big difference, like decarbonising our economy? And my view is it should be for the big plays around decarbonising, sustainability, regenerative tourism, all that sort of stuff we know will make a very big difference. It will be co-funded. It's not grants. Well, it's money given out, but it's co-funded. But very excited about what that will look like. In fact, the tourism sector had the most money of any sector of the economy given to it during COVID, $600 million directly, and we estimate about $4 billion indirectly through things like wage subsidies and COVID support programs. Let's be honest, the sector that took the biggest hit from tourism was Auckland. And Auckland has done it really, really hard. Pam Ford and I have had a number of conversations over the last 2 years about what we can do, and it's one of the reasons why we've put a lot of money into Auckland. But we do know that metro centres such as Auckland City do play a significant role in the national economy. There, I've said it, Phil. But driven by a whole lot of benefits and co-location of frontier and international firms, tertiary institutions, etc., that benefit from shared infrastructure, access to talent and knowledge, spin-overs. And it's one of the reasons why last year my colleague Carmel Sepuloni and I announced $37.5 million into reactivating Tamaki Makaurau Auckland package that was developed alongside Auckland Council and Auckland Unlimited. Can also congratulate Auckland Unlimited on delivery of the Activate package, which has provided significant advice and support for small businesses. Very valuable. It doesn't estimate, though, the pain that a number of businesses suffered and will continue to suffer, I know, until we get the borders open and the reset in place. Look, I'm pleased to hear from Auckland Unlimited that weekday spending in the city centre has been trending upwards during the month of March. It's good as people come back. It'll be hard to know what will end up happening. Will people work from home continuously? Will we see a move back into the city centre? Hard to know at this point in time. Hey, I've got something beeping at me in the corner here that's telling my time up. So very, very quickly, I know the last 2 years have been tough for businesses. I absolutely know that. And there have been numerous conversations between myself and Pam and Michael Barnett and Phil Goff and a whole lot of Auckland leaders around what to do and how to get out of this recovery, the global pandemic. But as we open to the rest of the world again, we must take this opportunity to shift our economy to a high wage and low emissions economy. As I've just described, there are a significant amount of work occurring across all my portfolios and right across government to transform our economy, and I look forward to working with all of you to unleash our full economic potential. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions. I know you need about half an hour to talk with the subject, but then again at 4:30 on is it Friday yet?
Feels like it, doesn't it? Minister, I'll pass you this, if you want to come and have a seat. Okay, we've got some questions coming through on Slido, which is wonderful. If I can just take a moment to read through those, and in the meantime ask you, you mentioned that Auckland is a gateway for tourism and an economic hub. So what is central government doing specifically to support Auckland as a priority?
Well, I think over the last 2 years we've supported Auckland as a priority. I mean,
Going forward,
well, Auckland is always a priority. I mean, things like, in terms of the Auckland economy, as mentioned, the big one is the industry transformation plans. They will have an impact across nearly every sector that's represented in our city here. When we talk about high wage, low emissions, what we're really talking about is gone are the days where we just import a whole lot of foreign workers to do the jobs. We want to start training a whole lot of Kiwis right across the sectors from apprenticeships all the way through to advanced manufacturing, etc. In the part, we had the highest level of immigration in the OECD, and as mentioned, it was not a way to drive productivity or sustainability, and I don't think we were doing the best thing for Kiwi workers either.
training our people takes time though, right? And there's a labour shortage issue right now, and we heard from Scott Tasker earlier that there's airline capacity is at 30% of what it was. When are we going to see pre-departure testing come off? Aucklanders, I think, want some certainty. Certainty was what I wrote on my card.
Yeah. Look, there's a lot of work being done in this space, and I have talked to Chris Hipkins about this. Expect an announcement within the next couple of weeks. But I was down in Queenstown yesterday welcoming back a Qantas flight, which was the first flight direct from Australia into Queenstown for over 330 days. They're really excited about it down there. They, as you can imagine, Queenstown has done it incredibly hard, even though Queenstown saw the greatest increase in domestic tourism of any region, still didn't make up for the loss of international tourists.
Okay, we have a question here on Slido, and speaking about the industry transformation plans you were talking about, Auckland has large competitive advantages in our creative industries, especially in the digital age, but the creative ITP is on indefinite hold. Why?
The creative ITP? We've got one, the digital ITP. There was never a creative one. There is a digital ITP, that is certainly not on hold. I think we're talking about the same thing. There was never, well, not in my time, there was never a creative one, but a digital one. And submissions on the discussion document have just closed. There's some really interesting stuff going on in the digital space. Look, we recognise that we do have to do things differently. The primary sector held up the economy during the pandemic, but we've got to be based on a hell of a lot more than just our primary sector if we're to grow our economy in a way that's sustainable.
Okay, talking about workers here again, it's not that we don't want to train workers, we just don't have enough people to train. What's stopping us from letting skilled workers and investors in now? Nothing.
If you're paying 1.5 times the median wage at the moment, you can get them in, and if you become an accredited employee, you can bring in people from when we open the borders again from the 31st of July at the median wage. What we don't want to see is, again, a whole lot of unskilled labour in. But this is an issue that is afflicting the economies of every country in the developed world. McKinsey & Co came out in, I think it was 1999, but certainly last century with a tag. It was called the War for Labour. The War for Talent. And what that talked about was the fact that there really is a talent shortage right across the developed world. And it meant that, with talent being quite, I was going to say transient, but mobile, then they could go to where they saw the best opportunities. I think that has changed now. I actually think there is a war for labour. If you have a look at the job vacancies across the developed world, there are literally millions, even though latest job figures in the States seem to have topped out. And so it doesn't look as if they're continuing to increase. But there are literally millions of jobs available in the developed world for anyone that wants to travel and has the skills, I suppose. One thing we have got to do, though, is we have got to provide a very clear value proposition for why people would want to come to New Zealand, whether that's foreign direct investment or investor migrants or people who are working in those skilled areas. But what we refuse to do, or what we will not allow in, is low-skilled or no-skilled migrants to do jobs that we think Kiwis can do.
I was speaking with Kia, and I think I saw Tony in the room earlier on AM about attracting skilled Kiwis back, and what is it that's holding them back. And it's not necessarily about wages, it's about the environment for working here, whether people can offer flexible working, whether you can come back from overseas and have good schools for your kids to go to and enjoy the environment here. What kind of emphasis is being put into that, creating that kind of environment for our skilled Kiwis to come back?
It's an interesting question. I don't think you have to sell the benefits of New Zealand to New Zealanders. And let me give you an example. I'm the Member of Parliament for Napier. Hawke's Bay is an economy that is doing incredibly well, and a lot of my friends who left at the end of the 7th form, that's year 13 for the young ones, vowing and declaring never to come back, have gone either overseas or to Auckland, and like me, I used to go back at Christmas time and say, beautiful place, but there's nothing I can do here. And then when I spent some time there, I realised actually there is a lot I can do here. And what we are seeing is this economic growth across the regions. A lot of it kick-started actually by the Provincial Growth Fund, or the over $4 billion we've invested over the last 3 or 4 years into the regions. People are looking at the regions with a new sort of lens, saying, you know what, I don't necessarily have to live in Auckland, I'm going to move back to the Bay. And it's the same with people living in London. There are absolute advantages in living in London, I buy into that. But there are absolute advantages in living in Auckland or Hawke's Bay or anywhere in New Zealand that New Zealanders know. So it is a conscious choice for them, in my view, around where they choose to live, because we have some of the best skills here. I personally believe, and I used to travel a lot as a businessman, that we have the best country in the world. It's attracting high-skilled migrants from other countries who perhaps don't know the inherent benefits of bringing up a family in Auckland, the magic of the Hauraki Gulf, the fantastic weather. For the first time in a long time, I can say, you're a great rugby team. There are a lot of benefits of living in Auckland that we have to convey in a way that gets people thinking, you know what?
Is that going to bring people home?
Look, Kiwis will come home. It'll be because their parents are getting older, or they've got young kids and they want to bring them up in the sort of environment that they went to. So I don't think, they are, of course, Kiwis are always welcome home. And there is a greater pull for Kiwis who have friends and family here than there is for someone who we're going to ask to travel halfway around the world to come here.
On the labour, though, a question from Slido. You say there's a war for labour, so can you describe unskilled labour and why it's bad for New Zealand if they want to come here?
I'm not saying it's bad. What I am saying is what we've done in the past is we've based on our economy fundamentally on labour as opposed to plant and capital equipment that'll drive through productivity. Let me give you one example. This is a bit old, this example, but you'll hear where I'm going. Fisher and Paykel had a plant down in Mosgiel, and I think they closed in about 2008, and about 400 people lost their jobs. Now, I may have got some of those figures wrong, but for the point of the story, hear me out. And I remember the first thing I thought when I saw that was 400 people in Mosgiel, that's going to devastate that community. Next thing I thought is, why have we got an assembly plant in Mosgiel employing 400 people? If that plant had been in China, it would have been twice the size and it would have been employing 40 people. That plant was never going to be sustainable into the long term, because the cost of assembly using people versus machinery, this is just an example, will never compete with a modern economy like China that has robots doing a whole lot of this stuff. We have got to get out of the mindset that the way to grow a company is by employing a whole lot of people, as opposed to investing in plant and machinery that's going to drive productivity.
I guess you need the people that have the skills behind them to introduce that machinery as well.
Really
and so
point.
We need to attract them here.
It's a really, really good point. It's why we've made apprenticeships free, for example. 190,000 Kiwis have taken advantage of this. I mean, one of the things I did when I lived in Auckland is I wrote the business case for, and then I went and ran AUT University South Campus. And the purpose behind that campus was actually removing the non-academic barriers to entry for people who found it hard to come to the city. It was $70 for a bus fare, or they had to work, or they had to look after their auntie or pick up their younger daughter. These were really smart people, but the opportunities or the barriers to engage in higher education made it too difficult. So we wanted to remove those barriers. And in a way, that's what we're doing with our Apprenticeship Boost scheme. We're saying, okay, we understand that for some, the cost of entering the trades training may be high. Let's remove that barrier and let's get people into this. And as mentioned, 190,000 people have taken it up. We're going to extend it at the end of 2023, and we think there's probably about another 33,000 that are going to take advantage of that.
I think this is another question around pre-departure testing. Auckland is desperate to get tourists back. Why have we made it so hard to get back into New Zealand? The New Zealand Traveller Declaration took me 40 minutes to fill in for my kids and I. It doesn't sound very, very fun, and I'm sure a lot of people are dealing with that.
Look, let's be honest about it. We are still in the middle of a global pandemic. 530 million people have had COVID. I think yesterday there was 338,000 declared cases of COVID.
We are, but other countries are dealing with it in a different way. They've opened their borders, they're welcoming people in.
Yep, and we are just about there. And, it has been a relatively conservative approach to COVID, but I'll tell you one thing that I think will be our government's legacy. I've got a very good friend whose daughter caught Delta in the UK, and she came home and she had long COVID, and she's coming right now, but it's taken over a year. She has a number of friends in the UK who are quite sick with Delta, didn't need hospitalisation, but were still sick, who have gone into their doctor for another ailment, and they have found that they have some form of organ scarring. Now, I'm not saying that everyone that got Delta is in this position, but I'm saying that it looks like the health impacts, the long-term health impacts of Delta can be significant compared to Omicron. We kept Delta out of this country, and as a consequence, I think the health and well-being of our communities will be significantly better than the vast majority of countries who said, let's just open the borders and deal with Delta. We have taken a reasonably conservative approach. We have put the health and well-being of our communities first and foremost, and there are some critics of that. But I make no excuse for keeping New Zealanders safe at a point in time of great uncertainty.
I think a lot of people have commented today too about our initial response and how that was seen around the world, but a lot of people have said initial response to just to point out.
In terms of the pre-departure testing, I get you, and I hear that. And as the Minister for Tourism, I've heard that a lot. I'm talking to Chris Hipkins about this, who's the Minister in charge, obviously, of our COVID response. And he said there was work going on, so expect a lot of work going on in the space, so expect some announcements in the not-too-distant future.
Okay, I'm aware that you have to leave very soon, so I'm going to go with one last question. New Zealand has been a bit slow getting to a place of recovery, creating a state of stagnation and lack of momentum. What can be done generally to motivate people again?
To motivate, well, I don't know about you, but I'm really motivated. I hear you on the radio. I don't know what you look like at that time of the morning, but you sound really motivated. Look, I've been now involved in the tourism industry for 18 months. I've been the Minister for Small Business for 4.5 years. I've been the Minister of Forestry for 18 months, Regional Economic Development. What I am seeing across our economy is a whole lot of opportunities that exist in a post-COVID world. Now, there are some old world businesses that will, they'll do okay, and we want them to do okay. But as mentioned, this is the last generation of business owner that's going to thrive, let alone survive, without being digitally enabled. What I see is a whole lot of opportunity to take brand New Zealand and take it to the world. Now, as part of my economic development portfolio, I've also got half shares for Damien O'Connor and NZTE. The stuff that is going on with a lot of our exporters, and no doubt some of you are in the room here, blows my mind. There is some really innovative stuff going on. The stuff that Callaghan are funding, that Callaghan is funding, amazing stories there. So if you're not motivated about what you see or the opportunities, I would go on to the Digital Boost website. I would go on to the Callaghan website. I'd go on to the NZTE website. I'd have a look at what's happening around the world. And if you're an innovative, if you're an entrepreneur, if you back yourself, goodness me, I do think there are opportunities. Hey, there is one question here that I've got
answer it.
I've got to answer.
You're holding yourself up though. Don't blame me. But answer it. Go.
And Andy Hamilton will deal with it. Australia, Canada, with superior living standards, are doing what they can to attract talent. Now, I've lived in Australia. Well, I've laboured in Australia. Canada's a fantastic country. There's no doubt about that. But if I had a choice between living in Australia or Canada or New Zealand, and I know a lot of you do have that choices. I mean, I suppose I have that choice. I could up my family. I know I could get a job in any one of those countries. But I choose to live in New Zealand because I genuinely believe that this is the best country in the world. Now, and the reason I got into politics is because as mentioned, I used to do a lot of travelling to Asia, to the Middle East, a little bit to Europe and the States as a businessman. And apart from being good for business, it was tonic for the soul because I'd come back to New Zealand and realised how lucky we are living in this fantastic country. Now, I'm not saying we haven't got challenges or issues. Of course we've got challenges or issues. And as a government, we're working really hard to find solutions to those. And we were working really hard with a whole lot of you to find solutions to the issues that bedevil us at the moment. But overall, I wouldn't choose any other country at this point, and I've got 4 kids, any other country at this point in time to live in than New Zealand.
I think you're probably speaking to a room that would all agree with you on that. Honourable Stuart Nash, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Can we all please show our appreciation? Thanks so much.